grievers, we don't need better attitudes. We don't need stronger wills. We don't need more advice. We need better systems. We need more resilient communities. And we need safer space just to be held in our grief. Welcome to Full-Time Grievers, the podcast for people who aren't pretending we're over it. I'm Nathan McTague, co-founder of the Center for Emotional Education and a grief specialist. Here, we talk about what it really takes to survive bereavement, how to move not on, but forward. Tune in for stories, tools, and truth-telling from me and other full-time grievers learning to live through loss without abandoning ourselves. Thank you for being here and for showing up in whatever state you're in. Today, we question some of the contemporary systems that shape our grief. I'm Nathan M. McTague, and this is Full-Time Grievers. I've been thinking a lot about how, especially in Western culture and most especially in America, there are conventions and social norms that make it more challenging to be with our grief in normal and healthy ways. So I wanted to spend some time in this episode, commiserating a little bit about some of these challenges and also considering some of the things we could do instead. So I came up with a couple of lists. One are the challenges. The second list are the opportunities. We'll get to both, but I'm going to name all of the challenges first, and then you'll hear some of the opportunities are directly responsive to the challenges. Some are tangential, but still in the same range. And I'm naming these not just from theory or, like I'm making them up or something, but from lived grief and from years of supporting grievers and listening to what my fellow grievers say when they feel safe enough to tell the truth. So first we'll look at the obstacles, 10 of the toughest obstacles that our culture throws at grievers. And as you listen, you don't have to agree with every point I'm making, and you don't need to hold all this at once. Just notice what lands for you. Notice what brings a sense of recognition or resonance. If there are ones you're like, oh yeah, notice that. And if there are other ones you're like, that hasn't really shown up for me, that's worth noting too. So some of these I think will be more obvious. Some of these will be maybe a little less obvious, maybe particularly the way I'm putting them, but roll with me here. Let's see how far we get. So number one on my list of 10 things I don't like about grieving in America. Number one is the expectation of emotional and cognitive coherence. There's this pressure, if you will, to consistently explain our experience or our feelings or our needs clearly and logically, which is super hard when we're working with an invisible concussion. I call it an invisible concussion because there's such a dramatic integration process that the nervous system and the brain go through together when we lose someone who's close to us and when we're going through the process of grieving them. One can be, like real heightened nervous system reactivity, like going into survival mode and staying in survival mode for a significant period of time. And from there, we can't really be rational or logical or clear or consistent in how we communicate. And same when we're in the sort of the less acute, more active phase, if you will, of grief, where we're more attuned to, we're more likely to be in the emotion or in an emotional mode with our grief, less in survival mode, but still very much in the feelings. Again, not a place where we're more likely to be rational, where we're more likely to be clear and consistent and logical in our assertions. And I think because we don't have the understanding around this in our culture, people don't know to expect it. So others, non-grievers, people supporting the grievers, often have discomfort or disorientation come up when we contradict ourselves, or when we don't remember stuff, or when we can't focus enough to have a full conversation. They're like, ooh, something worse must be wrong with you, or you're not doing that well. Likewise, confusion, struggling to articulate ourselves, having mood swings, or even just a range of different feelings about our grief can be misread as dysfunction, or again, not doing well. They're having a bunch of anger come up, or they're having a bunch of, I don't know, they seem really frozen over there. Maybe their grief is worse. They're not doing as well navigating it. And this really gets in our way as grievers, because we're expected, or we expect ourselves to be able to maintain some level of normal functionality that just really isn't realistic for anyone to expect. And when we can't or don't live up to it, that can complicate our grieving experience. We can give ourselves a hard time. We can wind up trying to stuff our grief, or trying to rush functionality and normalcy and rationalness, right? Trying to really make it look like we have everything together instead of just being real with where we are. So, number one, that expectation of emotional and cognitive coherence. Number two, support in the form of platitudes. Yeah, this one is a real pet peeve of mine. I don't know if it hits other people the same way it does me, but any kind of rote phrases of comforting or bright-siding, like they're in a better place, or they're at peace now, or they're home with whoever, that kind of stuff offered instead of, just listening or being with, or proffered as a way to kind of help the person feel better, or almost anything that follows at least, at least you got to be with them, or at least they didn't suffer, or at least you don't have to worry anymore, right? Those kind of things that are, again, meant to offer some comfort, but really often don't land as being witnessed or met where we are. Along these same lines, there can be advice offered instead of presence. Again, here, the instead of presence, I think, is the important juxtaposition. Anything offered instead of presence, but advice in particular, like, you just need to no, whatever it is, or it's just like, whatever, like one of the other ones, like, you just need to take good care of yourself, or you just need to get good sleep, or you just need to focus on the important things right now, or you just need to get through the funeral. And it's like, shut up and just be in it with me. Don't tell me what to do or how to think, or where I need to go, or how to be with this. Be in it with me. And I think even useful and, important meaning making that along these lines can be given too soon. Still, instead of presence, things that it might actually be super useful to hear as a griever, just not when we're pouring our guts out or in a puddle in the corner. At the time when we can actually hear it and make use of it. All right, number three, super narrow emotional permission. Sadness gets allowed, despair gets allowed, sorrow gets allowed, the feeling of grief gets allowed, but anger, numbness, guilt, relief, these are typically less welcome in someone's grieving process. And when we're not crying or otherwise actively emoting, we get praise for being strong, which can encourage us to equate strength with emotional suppression. Again, looking like we have it all together. And again, emotional range or variability, like a lot of feelings or swinging from one feeling to another, can be misread as instability or not doing as well. And a lot of times when I see, now for me, when I see someone expressing something like anger or guilt or fear, I actually wonder about the grief that they must be carrying. because we're so used to not recognizing those feelings as being part of grief. And I now see them as such integral parts of grieving that I almost always now connect them to, ooh, there must be some grief under there. Number 4, grief illiterate institutions. Gah, bless America. Workplaces, schools, healthcare systems that are just generally unprepared to support grievers. They don't have enough information. They disseminate outdated information, and they systematically fail to meet grievers where we are. There might be, minimal or symbolic or even insulting bereavement policies available, little or no grief leave, little or no on-site emotionally safe spaces for grievers, few, if any, actual guidelines or procedures for anyone involved. I mean, grievers, HR, or management. So grief gets treated as this really private inconvenience, something that we have to go through on our own and quickly, manage so we can get back to work unimpeded. We don't get supported in our places of work or places of, social congress or, other affiliations to work through this. They don't have systemic or organizational prowess or even, like plans for supporting grievers. So we aren't able to rely on those places or institutions to help us or to even see us, meet us where we are, or allow us. All right. Keep going here. I hope I'm not just like activating everybody in the audience today. I hope you're able to sit through these. I promise I'm going to get to some of what we can do instead. But number 5 is support that disappears right after the funeral, right? Or right after the celebration of life. And this has kind of multiple parts to it, I think, because early there can be really intense, sometimes overly intense care. Food trains, offers to help with arrangements or to take care of kids, all those really important things, but like times 10. And then like 4 weeks or right after the services, whatever they are, utter silence, as if the whole world collectively just forgets that we're still going through something. Our person is still gone. We're still grieving. So support fades out or just drops off right as the grief gets harder. I mean, ask most anyone who's grieved deeply. The beginning is the most shocking, but in context, it tends to be way easier than a month out or 6 months out or the second year. When we're more present to the pain, we're more present to the loss, we're more present to what we're going through and what kind of changes are happening for us. And we have far less support than in those initial days and weeks. Most of us also don't really have like cultural or familial structures for long-term accompaniment or long-term support or long-term witnessing. Right. So we don't have that we can fall back on. And unless you have a direct experience with it, it often doesn't occur to people to be that ongoing witness for someone else who's grieving. Unless you know what it's like to have the support disappear, you're unlikely to even think, oh, it's a month later or it's after the funeral. Now's probably when they could really use support. Right? We don't get trained in that. We don't get taught that culturally. Along the same lines, I think we're challenged by the timeline that's imposed on grief. That's number 6, the timeline imposed on grief. Phrases like moving on or grief journey or bereavement even can be used to imply a finish line, which falsely suggests that we're going to get to an end. It's just this period and then something else. Or time used as a measurement of health. Like they were back to work in the next week. or within a few months, they were getting things back to normal. Right? We use that as a way to compliment someone's like grief success. It didn't take them a long time, and so they must be doing a good job. Or how the like recurring grief that comes up months later or years later, just kind of another wave of it, that gets treated as regression under this paradigm, or some kind of excessive struggle instead of something that's just totally normal. Right? If we had the sense that there's not a timeline associated with it, that it's just like this kind of ongoing becoming and returning process, or returning to processes, or I mean, the metaphor of waves is really the best, that there's going to be another wave and another wave and another wave, however far apart they get. That can be a much more useful way to hold it, right? This idea of a timeline really can force us into thinking that we're starting at point A and eventually we'll get to point Z and then we'll be out of grief. And I think that's a real disservice to us. And I think that timeline also encourages us to do number 7, which is pathologize normal grief, right? The pathologizing of normal grief is a huge challenge for grievers of all kinds, no matter what we're grieving. Because in this, especially when you're grieving the loss of a loved one, healthy grieving gets treated as a disorder or a syndrome of some kind. A syndrome, I'm not sure why I said it that way, a syndrome, far too quickly. Like within a year, you get labeled as having complicated or prolonged grief disorder. So even like really normal time that it takes for grieving, like a year, 2 years, 5 years in perpetuity to be like still dealing with waves of grief, that gets framed as something that's wrong with you, not as something that's just like a normal way that grief works. So normal grief then gets really over scrutinized, looking for depression coming up, or looking for too much emotional distress, or looking for one of these so-called disorders, instead of just being witnessed and held and understood as it is. And then we grievers get taught to mistrust our own responses and our own process of learning to live with the grief. We wind up having, on top of all of everything else, the complex process of going through the grieving, we're then questioning, am I doing this right? Am I taking too long? Are other people thinking that I'm losing it? Do I maybe have a disorder? I questioned that for like all of the first year and most of the second year, until I was just like, no. I'm going to talk about way we can frame it instead in just a minute. But yeah, that one's a really tough one for me. Number 8, the obsession with productivity, especially in the West, especially in America. Functioning itself gets conflated with healing, and just doing grief is seen as losing time or wasted energy somehow. Slowness, rest, even collapse gets miscast as some kind of weakness, not as a normal process or a normal part of grieving. And back to normal becomes this kind of gold standard for getting through grief. And like we sort of find ourselves referring back to, or coming back to, or eventually getting back to this frame of like how much we can still get done. That's fostered through the culture, but we carry it ourselves, instead of how can we really integrate this grief or this transforming that we're doing, right? How can I really be with this process is barely even a consideration, because we have this framing of how can I get back? How can I still get things done, or how quickly can I get back to normal? And I think one of the absolute worst things that grievers face, I mean, of course, it's the loss of our person. That's number 1. But alongside that, I think many times competing for how bad it is all the other things that we're expected and have to do or have to keep doing while we're also grieving. That productivity as the sign that we're healthy, or something that we have to carry along while we're also carrying the weight of our grief. Number 9, the pressure to let go. Where we get so much messaging in culture about, oh, eventually you're gonna have to come to terms with the fact that they're gone. So let go, let go quick, let go now, let go often, let go. And so, any kind of continuing bonds that we have, or continuing feelings that we have, can be misunderstood as unhealthy, hanging on, or, not letting go, not letting the process run its course. And enduring love for the deceased is kind of casually framed as something to eventually outgrow. And this gets iterated in lots of different ways. I think one's less subtle but indirect way is like when someone loses their partner, and then a year into that grieving process, 2 years into that grieving process, whatever it is, some people it's like 6 months, they're hearing, when are you going to get out there and start dating again? When are you going to stop grieving and get back to life, right? When are you going to let this go? And even, talking about or to our loved one who's passed can be seen as problematic, or something we have to keep private, or something that's kind of weird. Oh, she's still talking to Bob. I don't know. She hasn't let go yet. And there is a little bit of a progressioning of worseness, I think, here with each of these, at least in my own estimation. I don't know if they land the same way with you or not. But number 10 is the expectation to return to who we were. And this one hits me particularly, as I was thinking about these, and I thought of this one, I started crying, actually, just like, oh shit, yeah, that's not happening. And what a bummer for all of us. I think it can be so painful for so many of us, in part because this kind of forced, not kind of, but it is a forced identity change that we're going through. It gets made wrong. It's not something we ask for, but we're often held accountable for it as though we asked for it. You just, you became a different person, or you disappeared, or you stopped hanging out with us, or you just weren't the same after. It's like, of course not. And it's as though, in this one, I think grief culturally gets framed as a detour, not a threshold, not something that we pass through and are different after. It's something that we go through and then we get back to normal, which just isn't going to happen. And on top of everything else, I think this adds a pressure to reclaim a former self that necessarily can't still exist, because our person isn't here, and they held part of who we were then. They saw that part of us, and they took that part of us with them. Now, we didn't take all of us, but there's necessarily a part of us that is also gone, because we don't get to interact with that person of ours anymore and what they held of us. So we have to change. And we don't know where that will end, but the expectation that we'll settle right back into who we were before is not only unhelpful, it's unkind and a little bit disrespectful of how much our loved one's life meant to us. And I think this one also denies others who love us their own grief at losing some of who we were. That's a tiny death that they also have to integrate, which gets dramatically undermined by the idea that we should go back to who we were, right? That's the goal. Oh, okay. Whew. I need a breath after that. Maybe you need a breath before that too. After that too. But as we, sit with that list, I think because of this, because of these 10 things and others like them, for many of us, grief is harder than it otherwise would be. Not because we're doing it wrong, it's because we're grieving within a culture that doesn't know how to hold us. And we take that as our fault, but it's not our fault. Full-Time Grievers is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education, home of Emotional Sovereignty School and Neuro-Emotional Coaching. If you're learning to live through loss and to stay connected to yourself along the way, our programs offer practical tools for nervous system support, emotional processing, and the kind of healing that doesn't rush you to move on. You can learn more at centerforemotionaleducation.com. And if you'd like to help keep this podcast ad light and listener supported, you can contribute or simply share this episode with someone who needs it. And thanks. So before we shift into what I wish was different, and maybe the difference that we're creating, I just want to slow down here a second. Just recognize it with you that if any of what I shared already has stirred up, I don't know, some frustration, some ire, some anger, some sadness, or, really any kind of discomfort, that's totally understandable. These are challenges that if you're a griever, you're probably facing at least one of, even if you don't agree with the whole list. So if it serves, you might take a breath here, or consciously let your shoulders drop, or let your body relax a little bit. Or maybe, take a little stretch. Yawn here, if that seems more like what you need. Both can be ways to just give our nervous system a minute or a second, a pause, a break to integrate some of that agitation. Okay, so part 2 is what I wish grieving in America looked like instead. And again, maybe these are things that we can together be working toward. And I want to be clear, this isn't just some utopian wish list. I think of it as a set of practical shifts that would reduce harm, even if we only implemented some of them. And you'll notice some of them are direct answers to the list of 10 challenges that we face as grievers. 10 things I don't like about grieving in America. So number 1, for what I wish grieving in America were like, and maybe hopefully what we can move it toward, is number 1, we tolerate emotional variability and inconsistency. Contradiction, conflict, mood swings, all get accepted as normal. Revelation. Inarticulateness, even wordlessness, lapses in memory, confusion, all allowed. Grief gets understood as a nonlinear, fragmentary, messy, and ongoing process. Number 2, we prioritize presence over advice. So, we use fewer words. We do more listening. We foster more empathy for grievers. We hold silence. We hold stillness. We hold safe proximity. And we allow those to do their work instead of fixing. Witnessing then becomes valued more highly than fixing feelings. Love that one. Number 3, we get full emotional permission. Hallelujah. So anger, guilt, numbness, relief, even joy, all get to be included in our grieving process. Instead of stoicism and placidity, emotional honesty is celebrated as true resilience. Not overdoing it, not losing it, but authenticity. Strength then gets redefined as staying with yourself as showing up authentically, as being real about your grief, right? Not how quickly you can tuck it back in or tuck it up and seem normal, seem all put together. Number 4, we access and benefit from systemic grief literacy. Woo! So that means we have flexible, realistic bereavement policies in place at school and work. Organizational leadership is trained in the basics of grief support and processing. Compassion, empathy, and emotional safety get built in structurally, institutionally, not just in rare exceptions. Number 5, I'm feeling myself like the excitement is like rising as I talk about these, because I'm like, man, imagine, oh, let's breathe some life into it, right? So, number 5, we receive ongoing communal accompaniment. Community support extends months, extends years, and recurs around important anniversaries. Rituals for those anniversaries, but also for ordinary days and occasional bigger opportunities where we all come together for rituals. Community becomes a steady presence for us as we move through the different waves of our grief, not just crisis-only support. Number 6, grief is recognized as long-term, like right out of the gate, as the whole concept. No expiration date is assumed. No timelines are imposed. We have language and norms that assume an ongoing relationship with the deceased. Sort of like Dia de los Muertos, right? Every day. Where we continue to have this relationship. Maybe we welcome them to dinner each night, or we have rituals where we check in with them on a regular basis, right? Not just once a year or a couple days out of the year. Also, recurring grief waves are normalized, not treated as something weird, normalized for months, years, even decades later, right? And that's understood as both the culture holding grievers and as grievers going through grieving, that these waves are just part of the process. Number 7, grief is understood as a nervous system process. Oh, imagine the possibilities. This means, like, before reframing or before offering someone some encouragement, that we, or certainly before advice or, any kind of things they should do, we make sure that all the nervous systems that are involved in the interaction, the griever's nervous system and the supporter's nervous system, and anyone who is attending's nervous system, are all regulated enough so that there can actually be a transmission and a reception, not in a moment of really just needing release and witnessing. Those are two different operations. And once we understand grief as a nervous system process, we will let the activation and the upheaval and the release be happening and be held and witnessed as it needs to be. And then in between those times, when people are available for it, then we can check in with them about, hey, how well are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting enough to eat? Are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting out there and trying to, do things that feel good to you? Not at the same time, two different processes, because we understand how nervous systems work around this. So that means nervous system literacy for helpers, but also just in general. So all parties have a sense of what's happening for grievers. And generally, just way less encouragement, way less advice, way less, if any, platitudes, and way more attunement, way more presence. Number 8, we all get to have slower expectations around functioning. So grievers' capacity gets understood as variable, as unstable, as coming and going. Productivity gets decoupled from success or wellness, especially during grief. So it's not a sign of how well you're doing how quickly you're getting back to work or getting back to doing all the stuff that you do. Sustainable pacing in our process becomes valued over speedy recovery. Keep imagining these possibilities, right? Keep imagining the world that grievers would get to live in, that we'd all get to live in, and how much better it would be for all of us if and as these things begin to become part of our cultural reality. Number 9, we foster those continuing bonds. Talking about our loved ones, not avoiding the subject of them or talking to them or telling stories of them. That's not avoided but welcomed. And that means for the supporters, we don't avoid bringing up the lost loved one. And as grievers, we're allowed to bring up our loved one, right? We're allowed to still talk about them, still talk to them. And this enduring love itself is understood as an adaptive part of the ongoing grieving process. One of those, the sort of tasks of grievers is to come to terms with the ongoing relationship that we still get to have, right? And so as a culture, we could really foster that by recognizing that that's not only something that's part of grieving, but something that we should celebrate our grievers doing, looking for signs of their loved one, looking for opportunities to receive a message from them, or looking for opportunities to reminisce about them, or looking for opportunities to share something about what they mean to us even now, even as we continue on after their death. So culturally, we ask and we invite the exploration of how connection lives on beyond death. We hold that as part of the process, and we foster that. I want to call it a transition, but maybe it's not even fully a transition, but we foster that element. Yes, you're going to still be experiencing the loss, and there's going to be continued waves where you feel the pain of them not being with you in time and space. And yes, you're also going to continue to reach out to them and feel the love that you have for them and long for them and see them and feel them when you can. Both. And then number 10, we actually hold space for the griever's identity to change, for the changes that happen as a natural part of our grievers going through their processes. This means grief gets seen as the threshold that it is, but that continues to reshape the lives of those who live on, right? It's not a threshold that we pass through once and then we're done. It's a repeating threshold that we go through again and again and again. So there's no mandate to return to some former version of ourselves that's, back 7 thresholds ago, right? There's an understanding that as we come through each threshold, there's a new layer of becoming that we're doing, and our people respond to that as part of our process too, recognizing and not trying to recognizing that that's normal, that that's healthy, that that's something that we all have to work with, and not trying to hold us to some former version of ourselves. So new values, new pace, new priorities are respected, not seen as weird or us changing into someone we're not, as we continue to evolve and change. And 2, I think that means we then give or could give room to our supporters or our family who have something that they're grieving too around the changes that we're going through. I think the classic example is the child who grieves their parent who went through changes after they lost their partner or they lost their parent or someone close to them, right? And there's the sort of classic version of "you never came back," we lost them too, but we also lost you, kind of thing. So If we hold space for the griever's identity changes as part of the cultural understanding of grief, we can also hold space for our supporters, our family who have their own grieving to do around the changes that we go through as grievers. Again, I kind of want to just breathe into the possibility of those embers of change. And I feel myself activated in some tenderness around, any grievers getting to have those. And to whatever degree you may have gotten to have some of that in your own process, I'm so glad for you. So that's my 2 connected lists and where I think we're off track and what we can do about it to help grievers and to help supporters of grievers have an easier time living through our grief. Not getting over it, not letting it go, but living through it. I'll be curious to hear, let me know if you have other grievances or if you happen to especially agree with any of mine. Like if you're like, oh yeah, number 9, let me know. I'd love to hear. Or if you're like, oh, you got to include number 11, this one you haven't mentioned, I would also love to hear that. Just as part of the archive of our experience as fellow full-time grievers, but also, as a way to foster the kind of changes that we can all use. My hope is that by considering them and talking about them, strategizing around them, we can begin to change them for all our sakes. If this episode wound up stirring something in you, kind of like I'm admitting it has for me, I want to reassure you that you don't need to do anything with it today. You can, that stirring makes sense to recognize and to sit with. And if there is something that you're inspired to do at some point, you can, but there's no pressure right now to do anything with what may be coming up for you around this. You might just, if it feels right for you, and maybe after you sit with it for a minute, just notice if there is one place that you can give yourself a little more permission for your grieving this week. Even that would be revolutionary. From where I sit, it's not about having perfect systems. It's about moving toward less harm for our grievers. And even one of these shifts would reduce suffering and make it a little easier for you or for a griever you love. So if you're a griever or if you're a supporter of a griever, you might look for how you could bring a little of, how it could be, that list, or what that list may have inspired in you for how it could be, to the grieving process that you're nearest, whether it's yours or one you're supporting. And I think if you take nothing else from this, I think really an important bottom line is that grievers, we don't need better attitudes. We don't need stronger wills. We don't need more advice. We need better systems. We need more resilient communities. And we need safer space just to be held in our grief. All right. I want to thank you for being here today, for tuning in. If this brought something up for you, let me know in the comments or reach out to me at support@fulltimegrievers.com. And I'll be happy to hear from you there. And again, however you're going through your grief, whatever processes you're using or not, however messy or tidy it is, however much you work within the cultural norms or buck against them, you're doing it your way. That's right. That's the right way to do it. Thank you for being here and for giving yourself permission to grieve in the ways that are right for you. If this episode met you where you are, please like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you'll know when new episodes drop. And if someone came to mind while you were watching, please send this to them. They could probably use it. You can download our free grief journal, A Place to Put It Down, through the link below. And there you'll also find the link to share your own grief confessional for the show. And remember, you don't have to get over it. Just stay with yourself through it. I'm Nathan M. McTague, and this is Full-Time Grievers.